Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of NHC Presents with myself, John McKellar of NHC Music. It's the first one in 2025, so a very, very belated Happy New Year to you all. And also an apology right off the bat. This was supposed to be out last week. As I posted up on the Facebook page, though, I had no Wi Fi during the time that we were supposed to record this episode. I really should have done a better job of forward planning with that. But we're here now, and I am here, I'm delighted to say, with a fantastic guest in David Burns of, well, several different projects. You're a man who wears many hats in this scene, David. Right off the top of my head, the most obvious being Marshall Chipped.
Yep.
There's Furore Cayley Band.
Yep.
You want to tell us a few more of your projects?
So Marshall Chipped, Furore Cayley Band, Pop Art, Roscoe Vacant and the Ganton Screeks, Dormant Sonics. I was very briefly in Dave Hughes and the Renegade Folk Punk Band, and I used to play in Proverbial Creek, and there's probably something else I'm forgetting as well. I should say as well, before we could really get into the interview, yeah, we had a bit of a delay from last week due to your internet connections as well. I completely lost my voice in the intervening time as well. So if I'm kind of coughing and spluttering my way through this and kind of struggling to make myself heard, it's because I'm only just getting my voice back now. So apologies, listeners, if you're kind of struggling to hear what I'm saying, but hopefully we'll get through it all right.
David, for over 10 years, whether it be the NHC Music Podcast or the ISAcast or anything else I've done with Jamie, people have listened to me take about a fortnight to get to the point. So they are not here because they're impatient. So I think it will be all right.
I'll be fine then.
David, lovely to speak to you, man. You obviously, I think the last time I would have seen you in person, I think would have been at the Marshall Chipped record launch.
The album launch, yeah, for the Dog Whistleblower album.
Yeah, now we'll touch on that a wee bit later, but before we do, as I usually tend to do, I want to go back to the kind of the start of your musical journey. First off, I would like you to tell me about what sort of inspired you to become a musician in the first place. Like, where did that spark come from that was lit for you?
It's kind of hard to pinpoint kind of exactly, but I kind of grew up in quite a musical household. So my dad plays piano, plays a bit of guitar. My mum sings. My aunt's a professional singer as well. So there's always been lots of music growing up around where I was. So kind of it was always something that was kind of there around me. But the idea of it being something that I would make myself as a professional thing, that didn't come along until kind of much later. I spent a lot of my childhood kind of messing about with music. When I was mum would tell you that like when I was a toddler, I would kind of like steal pots and pans out of the kitchen to make kind of makeshift drum kits. Had piano lessons when I was in primary school, but kind of enjoyed doing it. But I hadn't really kind of found anything that was kind of like my musical voice, if you like. That didn't come until kind of later on. I kind of listened to Top of the Pops and things like that when I was a kid, and there'd be stuff that I think would be all right, but there was nothing that kind of really massively spoke to me most of the time. The first kind of time that I really remember music making that kind of impact on me, it was on a family holiday out to America, and I must have been I was quite young, so early teens, 14, maybe 15. And we were out for my aunt's wedding over in South Carolina, I think. We flew into Florida because Mum and Dad decided we'd make a kind of family holiday of it. So we spent a wee while doing all the the kind of usual Disneyland stuff, and then we drove up. And it's a couple of days' drive to get there. And on the way, we had the radio on to kind of fill time because, as I say, it was about a 2-day drive each way. So to stop me and my brother getting absolutely maddeningly bored in the back seat, to put the radio on, and every so often I would hear kind of something that kind of clicked with me, and it was after I think it was on the second day that I kind of realised that all the different songs that I was thinking, oh, this I'm into this. They were all by the same band, and this was REM. So that was kind of when I discovered them. And I see you've got your little Michael Stipe in the background behind you there.
Yes, John's emotional support, Michael Stipe, has found a permanent residence over by the record player. I'm actually really struck by how similar that is to how I got involved in music in the first place. Because
Aye.
I, like yourself, wasn't really someone who attached myself to many bands. I've probably told the story on probably the IcyCast, if not before, that my first two kind of memories in life are watching and rewatching Stop Making Sense, the VHS tape, like again and
Yeah,
again when I was
love
probably
that.
4 years old, and listening to my mother's Graffiti Bridge cassette by Prince, so much that I wore it out. But other than that, I wasn't really obsessed with the music. I was obsessed with the suit that David Byrne wore
Yeah,
in the film, I think, more than
it
anything,
is quite a
and
look,
just
isn't it?
the general weirdness of David Byrne. And in Prince's case, it was just well, Prince. The entire vibe was just such a
Aye.
unique artistic vibe that I think I just was drawn to that from a very young age. But by and large, I didn't listen to a whole lot of music that I really attached myself to, like yourself, until I was probably 14, 15 years old. I'd heard Losing My Religion and I'd heard Shiny Happy People, kind of the singles, over the years and thought it pleasant enough. But then I bought Out of Time on CD in Blackpool on a holiday with, I think, an Alanis Morissette CD. Because I had kind of started to listen to Alanis Morissette as well. An uncle of mine introduced me to Alanis Morissette around the same time. But that first band for me was REM that got me right into kind of alternative rock music, which REM led me to Patti Smith, led me to the
Yeah,
Replacements, led me to Husker
it's
Du,
it's such a
led me to
great
so
jumping
many
off
different
point.
places.
Yeah,
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah, like when you look at how many of the bands that made the kind of 90s alternative boom matter so much, most of them paid tribute to REM as a massive influence. So I just was really struck by how similar that is to my story.
yeah, and out of
Unfortunately for me, I wasn't in the warm climate of South Carolina. I was down in Blackpool, and I think it was raining all week.
yeah, it's quite a different climate because when obviously a big part of the fact that so many of the radio stations were playing REM was
Yeah,
we were in the southern states of America. We were
yeah,
driving up through Georgia at the time. If this was a few years later when I had known more about REM, I'd have been kind of insisting we make a detour to go and visit Athens, Georgia. Unfortunately, I missed out on that. But Out of Time, it was the same starting point for me as well. Uh, I think at the time, Monster had just come out, so it was a lot of songs from Out of Time, Automatic, and Monster that I was hearing on the radio.
yeah.
Uh, when we got up to the big family do for my aunt's wedding, we met up with some family there, and on the last day, my uncle who had flown in from Cambridge gave me and my brother what he thought was a couple of dollars to like go and get some sweeties or something from to like use up the last of the money that he had in his wallet. But American money all kind of looks the same. He thought he was giving us like $1 each. He handed us over $20 each. So I was straight down to the mall to the nearest record shop because I'd been listening to this stuff all the way up, and I wanted to try and investigate it a bit more. The only record that they had in the store that I could afford, the American album prices at the time were mad, was Out of Time. So
And is that your original copy? Is that your
that
original
is
copy there?
that is my original copy.
Wow. So that's at
So
least 30 years old, probably,
yeah,
if it's from around the time of Monster.
yeah, it was not
Wow.
not that long since that had actually come out that I picked it up. So got home and just listened to that obsessively, and from there I started buying up the albums over here. The first one that I got was the best of the one that IRS Records put out when they signed to Warner as a bit of a
Ah,
uh,
yes, the old thank you, fuck you, goodbye,
yeah
best of.
yeah. So, but I didn't know any of that kind of story about it at the time. It was just another record that I could pick up,
Mhm.
and it had loads of songs that I didn't know. So this is the best of the IRS years. So this is my first exposure to things like South Central Rain, the one I love. It's the End of the World as We Know It, Driver 8. Um, and I was just absolutely blown away. I'd never really heard anything like that. And those first five IRS era REM albums, I mean, they're kind of Americana, kind of country, kind of rock and roll, but just generally, just kind of weird. There's a really odd sound to them.
Yes. Yeah. I think owing a lot to, particularly in the first couple of records, especially Chronic Town and, well, Chronic Town through Reckoning probably, that owes a lot to Mitch Easter and
Oh,
Don Dixon,
absolutely, yeah,
the producing partnership. Particularly, I think the way that they insisted on Stipe recording his vocals on the first couple of records was a stroke of absolute genius.
yeah,
Something that, from what I read, he kind of actively resisted initially, but they managed to get their way, which was quite fortunate because I think that they managed to do something really magical with an already just August voice. Like that voice is so singular and so it's I don't know about groundbreaking. That's kind of a bit too cliche a word to use, but there is not another voice like it in the annals of rock music. So for them to take that voice and then elevate it even another level and do something even more special with it, I think that was really what separated it. Alongside
yeah,
Peter
and
Buck's very interesting jangle pop guitar style that he kind of
yeah, and doing
invented slash borrowed
I
from Pylon.
and doing things like going and recording outside because they like the sound of the crickets in the background,
Uh-huh.
and
Yeah.
just doing kind of odd things like that. Just things that would
Mhm.
be absolutely against the rules in a kind of really established studio, but by going to
Yeah.
this slightly odd bloke who's got this home studio up the road, you can you
Mhm.
can get away with kind of get away with murder. I think the record label were like, "What are you doing on a lot of this stuff?"
Mhm.
But yeah, there's a great interview that I saw with Mike Mills, where he was talking about why they signed to IRS. It's because they wanted to always own complete control, complete copyright of their work, and they'd never wanted to be in debt. And IRS would let them
That's right.
have the control and never spent any money on anyone anyway, so there was never any
Mhm.
money there.
Yeah.
So the worst they got from them was just occasionally the guys in suits coming in saying, "What is this?" Okay, we'll put it out anyway. And having that kind of creative freedom, and I can't imagine any band signed to a fairly big label today being allowed to do that, and being allowed to have five albums where you're not chasing hits. You're being allowed to grow and develop your sound, your kind of artistic self. It's very changed days to now, where commercial labels are they're looking for hits, and if you're not getting into the top 10 with your first few singles, you're probably going to be dropped before the album even comes out. So
Absolutely. Yeah, we had
it's
seen that. We had seen that start to happen by the end of the 90s, with the whole grunge boom. Anybody that sounded remotely like Nirvana was getting hoovered up, and a lot of them were one and done. Like they would release a single or they would release an EP or an album, and if that didn't sell to a certain standard, they were never heard
yeah,
from again. And a lot
and
of
this
these are bands that are still active and they're still making music. They just
yeah,
have
yeah.
never been able to break back into that major label sphere again ever since the kind of that boom sort of died off
And the
because they
same
weren't able to
over
make a certain amount of money
right.
with their hits.
The same thing over here with the kind of Britpop thing, where
Yeah,
everyone with a guitar in Camden would get signed, and you get a chance to put out something, but then very few of them actually were given the chance to develop into anything particularly interesting. You just put out your first thought on a 7 inch, and if it didn't take off, that was you.
yeah. I think what REM managed to do with those first five records though was prove themselves as more than capable of being trusted with the creative control. And I
Yeah,
think that is obvious when you look at the massive deal they signed with Warner Music and the amount of control they were able to keep, even
unheard of.
signed to such a massive label.
Yeah, to
Is
sign
yeah,
to one of the biggest majors and keep creative control, it's like nobody
yeah.
gets to do that.
And then they come out with Green out of time.
And
Automatic for the
Green's an
people.
odd album.
And then Monster, which is completely different from anything else that they had ever done. And then New Adventures in Hi-Fi, which was all recorded live on the road. They were able to do these really strange things and yet be so accessible. And that I think is the essence of REM. That's such a
And yeah,
it's
I
like
think that's
David Lynch. It's like
mm,
David Lynch's Dune, or like a straight story. It's like a genius who's capable of taking you all kinds of different places, but is able to always lead you back to sort of a place where you feel like you're at home. And that's what REM is like for me.
and that's kind of the biggest thing that I've taken from them. I mean, yes, I've got a kind of guitar style that's not a million miles away from Peter Buck and things like that, and people can always hear their influence in the music. But more than anything else, it's the attitude to how you go about doing things, and about
Mm.
doing things because they feel artistically right, rather than because you're chasing anything. To that's kind of I've always tried to kind of go into what I'm making musically with the attitude of am I developing as a musician? Am I saying something interesting? I mean, I think it's kind of obviously I am never going to have anything like the kind of commercial success that band had. That's just virtually impossible. Um,
Especially now.
yeah, but yeah, there's kind of three kind of pulls on what I try and do musically. That's is it satisfying creatively? Is it fun to do? And I have to, because I'm doing this professionally. This is my job. I have to take into consideration: is it going to be able to pay the bills? So that's kind of one of the reasons why I've got so many different musical things going on, because they all kind of have different levels of pull on those kind of three things. Things like Marshall Chipped is immensely creatively satisfying because I am the principal songwriter in the band. It's gone through various different incarnations and different lineups. And sometimes it has just been a solo project of me. Sometimes it's been with friends. Sometimes it's had a kind of actual permanent lineup. Um, so there's always been kind of different levels of other people's input, but it's very creatively satisfying because I'm the main writer. It's usually fun. There are occasionally things that can make it more difficult, but generally it's a really really fun environment to be in, especially the way things are with the current lineup, with myself and the Wernick brothers. We've got a studio out in Kilmarnock that we go to every Tuesday to jam, and it's just really good fun just to get together with those guys and just hang out and play music and see what we can come up with. It's never really been massively commercially successful. I would love it if it made more money, but I've got other projects that cover that needs for what I need for my music, like Furo di Cayley band that's playing functions, so that is well paid.
Yeah.
Um, it's it's not creativity is not the biggest part of it, but I'm working out my how to play my parts, how to come up with arrangements for what will suit guitar in these for the Cayley tunes. Most of the time, it's fun because we're going out and playing parties, people's weddings. It's generally you're playing to really nice environments there for those gigs. In fact, I can only think of one time that I've played a really miserable night with the Cayley band, and that was we were booked in to a hotel in the West End of Glasgow, and it was for a party put on by the Glasgow University Rugby Society, and they basically turned out to be a Poundland Bullingdon club, and you can imagine what that night was like.
Yeah.
That's the only time I've ever had a gig with that band that wasn't fun. So that's not a bad hit rate.
It's not, is it? Considering that, like, if you go on tour with Marshall Chipped or any other kind of, or if you do solo, even if you're busking, you
Yeah.
have kind of control of where you're going and what you're, where you're, what you're going to be playing. If you're
Yeah.
going to a ceilidh you've been booked by someone else to come to that and play a specific set of music, you have no idea who those
I've
people
no
are.
idea.
You have
No.
no idea how they're going to respond to you or playing, and you have no idea how the night is going to turn out. So that is a pretty decent hit rate considering. I want to go further into the rest of your projects, but before we do, I would just like to kind of go back towards the beginning again, because I wanted to continue down the path of how you went from becoming interested in REM, and presumably that led to, like myself, that opened the door to so many different alternative
Yeah.
bands and artists through the years. How did that then go from you, who, as you've mentioned, have been in a musical family growing up? How did you then make that decision? I'm going to be a musician, and how did that start out for you?
I started getting more interested in learning how to play music from having listened to those albums. The one that really kicked things off for wanting to learn to play guitar was Document, and that is such a Peter Buck album. You know, the guitars in that are just massive, huge sound things, and yeah, the one I love, I just love the sound of the guitar on that. Just this kind of it's just a really vicious guitar attack on what a lot of people assume is quite a nice love song, but it really isn't. It's got this.
Yes.
It's a really vicious breakup song, and the guitars have this kind of real edge to them. So I started learning to play guitar from that, and I didn't sound anything at all like that at the time because the only guitar I had in the house. This was when I was still at school. This was 6th year at school. The only guitar in the house was my dad's old classical guitar. So trying to get this, big electric guitar sound on an island strung classical guitar when I'm at the stage where I can just about manage an E minor, and then trying to get a D major, and that was about the only chords that I knew, and it was very much like the Father Ted. Hang on, I can get this one.
Yes.
Trying to get the changes, but that was where it started, and it kind of came on along from there. When I moved up to Stirling to start university, before I moved to Stirling to start university, I went to see REM at Stirling Castle on the Upworld tour, and so I'd been listening to the records. I'd seen them live on videos. I had the road movie Monster World Tour video. But I'd never had a chance to see them live in person yet because they hadn't. This was the first time that they'd toured since I'd kind of discovered them. Obviously, Bill Berry wasn't part of that lineup; he'd retired since then. But it was Michael Stipe, Peter Buck, Mike Mills, plus the touring musicians that they had at that point. And yeah, managed to get tickets for the last night of the 3 days that they played at Stirling, and I was just absolutely overawed by the whole experience. It was the first gig that I'd ever went to, first time in a in a kind of big crowd for that kind of thing, and in a beautiful environment. And it's Stirling Castle. It's a lot nicer than your kind of average kind of arena gig.
Yeah.
Uh,
I've seen photos and I've seen video of the shows. Still in Castle gigs are the stuff of legend, really. Did you just say that it was your first ever gig?
that was my very first gig.
That is astonishing. But what I was going to say, I remember when I saw photos and some video of it years ago. I think there might have been something about it on the Perfect Circle DVD, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, there's a
But
documentary on the event
yeah,
in the town.
yeah, the set, the set that I think Michael Stipe had a large hand in building,
Yeah, those
or at least designing. It was
LEDs. Yeah,
gorgeous.
yeah,
Yes, absolutely stunning.
yeah, and when they got to the end of the set and they're playing "End of the World as We Know It," and every one of them is because they had like one or two for each song, but then at the end of the world as we know it, every one of them is flashing, and it's just kind of a really overwhelming thing, and the crowd's going mad, and it was a really great set list as well because that was one thing that I always really liked about them. Every time that I got the chance to see them, they had a really good knack of balancing the hits that everybody wants to hear, the ones that people would know even if they're just a casual fan or they've been brought along by
Yeah.
somebody that was going to if they're going with somebody that was more into the band. They always played lots of stuff from the new album. They never just relied on the hits, because that set list, there
That's
was
right.
loads of stuff off Up, which it's not. It's a really underrated album, but it's not one that would immediately obviously lend itself to live performance. But actually, it worked quite
Not
well.
obvious. Yeah, I completely agree. Not obviously, but it weirdly did. The Apologist,
Oh yeah,
especially, is a song that, from the live recordings I've heard, I've unfortunately never got a chance to see them. I did have tickets in 2005, but I ended up not being able to go.
the
And
Skinner.
I'm probably never going to be whole as long as I live because of that fact. But yeah, great album in terms of like translating to live. And when you listen to the record, and obviously it was victim of circumstance. Bill Berry had just decided shortly before they recorded it, or actually might have been
They
during
were just
rehearsals
starting
for it.
demos, I think. Yeah,
Yeah, he decided I'm not doing it anymore,
oh,
which
it's
is fair because he had a
understandable after all he went through.
yes,
Yeah, I mean, to have a
absolutely.
it's a miracle that guy's still alive. He had a
It
brain
is,
aneurysm on tour.
yeah, and it's
You're
not like
you're
he was
not
retiring
supposed
to
to
go and
walk
put his
away
feet
from
up.
that. No.
No, he's not. It wasn't a way to put his feet up. He became a farmer.
Yeah,
He was literally running a ranch. So he's not exactly sitting back and doing nothing.
there was an
But
interview with him quite recently where he kind of talked
mm,
about that change, and I think I'd never heard him talk about this before, but I think the aneurysm caused a bit of a change in his personality, and he just was not up for being the touring rock star anymore.
yeah,
He just really needed something much quieter, and I think he it sounded like he quite regretted leaving the band in that interview, but
mm,
there was this after what you went through. There's no way you could keep going with that. I mean,
no, absolutely,
it's something that kills almost everybody that it happens to. You don't walk away from your head exploding, basically.
yeah. And if you do, you don't want to tempt fate by putting yourself through because being a drummer, especially in a traveling rock band who are doing world tours, that's not a healthy occupation for a normal
No,
body. If
well,
a body has gone through something like that as well, that makes it even more of a kind of precarious situation to
about a
put
month
yourself in.
after it happened, after brain surgery, he was back to finish the tour. I mean,
Yeah,
people have this image of REM as
insanity.
being this kind of like fey, whimsical, um, soft kind of band.
Yeah,
They were no slouches. You know, they were guys that were
mm,
prepared to put the work in.
absolutely. I mean, on the same tour, Michael Stipe performed through an abscess in his mouth
Yeah,
for several shows. It wasn't until the agony was getting so much on top of him that he had to postpone, not cancel, but postpone some of the shows to go and
he had
get
a
dental work done.
he had a hernia as well on that tour,
That's,
and
that's right.
Mike Mills had
Yeah.
kind of abdominal surgery. They went
Hmm.
through the wars on the Monster tour,
Yeah, absolutely.
but they
Yeah,
kept on showing up. And
they did.
you talked about 2005. They had to cancel the gig that I was supposed to go and see them on. I had tickets to see them at the SECC, and that was the only other time that they ever cancelled a gig. And that was Mike Mills had come down with the flu so bad he was in hospital.
Yeah.
They didn't cancel lightly.
Yeah, he was dealing with something more akin to pneumonia, I think, if I remember reading
Yeah,
about that. It was kind
yeah,
of
it
like
was
pneumonia
nasty.
symptoms he had, wasn't it? Yeah.
Aye,
Aye, they have had some tribulations with him. It's a miracle they kept going for another,
yeah,
what's that, close to another 15 years or so?
it'd be something like that. Yeah, it was 2012 that they
Yeah.
finally called it a day. Yeah, I
September
was
2011, I
11.
think, round about then, yeah. Yeah, because I
Yeah,
think they released Collapse Into Now, and then a few months later decided just
that's
gonna
it.
call it.
Fair enough. Yeah, I was gonna.
Uh,
I got on a bit of a. We got on a bit of a tangent as I was talking about the set list of the on the Up tour.
yeah.
I was saying I always had a really good um, balance of the hits, the new songs, and the classic songs, and they played quite a few of really obscure old ones every time that I saw them. And one of the ones that really stuck in my mind from the set list from Sterling was Pilgrimage from Murmur.
Mm, Yeah, fantastic song.
Yeah,
Mm,
and yeah, I was just everything about that night was just absolutely perfect. I came away basically
mm,
wanting to be Peter Buck. I'd already started learning to play guitar, but that was just that was it. This is what I want to do. So my first year at university was, uh, yeah, I was going to classes, but most of the time I was going everywhere with a guitar, and any chance that I had, getting the guitar out and trying to learn a few more chords, learn to play a wee bit. I mean, I was not a good guitarist by any means of the imagination at this point. I was
mm,
incredibly basic. I was really just starting to learn. But a friend of mine, um, who had seen me going around everywhere with this guitar, said, we should do something. We should get a band going. So Tracy started writing lyrics. I was writing music, and it wasn't great stuff, but it was my first proper band. I roped a couple of school friends and who I knew from here, who were at Glasgow University. My mates Kevin on drums and Andrew on keyboard. We never got a permanent bass player for that band. This was Proverbial Creek, the first band that I ever played with. Um, we were. If you ever get a chance to hear any of those old recordings, you'll see why I've not really massively put them out since then. They are pretty awful. It's very basic songwriting, and every song is like, how many chords can I fit into this? Because I'm trying to put in every chord that I know
mhm.
how to play.
Of course,
But
yeah. We had the same approach when we first started. Um, our earliest music makes me it turns me inside out with embarrassment to hear the very first music we made. The
but
bass
you've
was
you've
like
got to go through that. You've got to
out of
have that. Yeah,
tune. Yeah, I didn't know how to sing. I didn't know how to put together words in a way that made a song sound more pleasant. I was just kind of it was my best estimation of what the fuck to
yeah.
do because I had no training or anything. I've never been trained in how to sing or anything, so it was just like
That is your
just keep
training.
messing it up until you start to accidentally do it better at some point.
Hi, just you've got to go through that phase of
Yeah,
yeah, this is terrible, but we will eventually
yeah.
get better at it.
Of
And
course,
yeah,
are you even a real artist if you don't despise your first tunes?
oh, absolutely. I mean, I like you say, just about turned inside out, cringing with embarrassment at the early stuff, and some of the recent stuff.
No. The recent stuff, I have to take issue with that because I've been thoroughly enjoying the recent stuff. But we'll get there in due course. Let's talk more about Proverbial Creek and where you went from there. Do you remember Did you guys play shows together, or did you simply record and get together to jam?
Not many. We did a handful of shows around Stirling, just at university things. The kind of music societies that would put on anybody, anybody and everybody.
Yeah.
That's and it was never very glamorous, but usually a lot of fun. I remember once telling Kevin, we've got a gig. We're playing the garage, and he thought I meant the garage in Glasgow. Like, no, this is the Stirling Music Society. This is literally a garage out the back of the university where they've got a drum kit that's held together with chewing gum and prayer. It
Right,
was, it was that kind of level of gig that we were doing.
right. So you cut your teeth in a really DIY environment then.
Very DIY. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
everything was
it's a
still
nice
good, but
tribute to
DIY.
it's a nice tribute to your heroes. They played their first show in an abandoned
The
church.
church, yeah, where they
Yeah,
didn't even
they
have a
were a long
name.
way from the 40 watt back then. Absolutely. Um,
But
so
it
we
was exactly the kind of way that university bands get started, though, because you put up some posters or flyers around campus saying band on tonight. There's free beer. Folk turn up,
It's
and
like a built-in scene, isn't it? It's like a built-in audience that you kind of have. I don't know if that's so much the case now with the state of everything
yeah,
these days, but particularly the education system. I don't really necessarily know that people have the time and are able to maneuver the stress of being in school these days to actually be able to enjoy things like that.
I
I
can
don't think
imagine it is
it's
an awful
pushed in
lot
any
harder
way.
now. I mean, I think
Yeah.
this was when I started university. It was at the time when tuition fees were first being introduced around the UK, and obviously
Mhm.
the Scottish government's covered the fees up here, but it was the start of uh, when England started introducing the fees, so it was becoming, you know, prohibitively expensive for a lot of people, and that changes the whole culture when you. I was still in an environment where you could go up not really knowing what you were doing, and I started off doing a degree in computer science, and was bored rigid by it, and was able to change to film studies. And you could do that. There was that kind of freedom to kind of go up and kind of find yourself. And the biggest part of the university experience for me wasn't so much on the campus. It was the open mic scene in Stirling, which was really, really strong at the time, and meeting loads of musicians there, seeing people playing, watching them play, learning things from them, and my kind of musical ability really accelerated from that, because that was when I first started playing live in public to an audience regularly. It was also where I started busking. When I graduated, there wasn't much work going, so I got a part time job in a shop, and when I wasn't working there, I would just pick up my guitar and go out and just set up outside the shopping centre and play the handful of songs that I knew how to play, and that has kept me going ever since. I mean, most of my income now comes from what I make busking.
Mm. So you mentioned like you had a handful of songs back then. Do you remember what your set was in those first days busking, and how has that evolved to where it is now? Is there a through line there, or have you adjusted it as you've gone based on what people wanted to hear?
There's a few that I've kind of always been in there, like Man on the Moon, Losing My Religion. They have always gone down well. What I try and do when I'm busking is I try and pick out of all the music that I like, the songs that are going to be most kind of accessible to a wide audience, because you want people to like what you're doing. So it tends to be kind of stuff like uh, Beatles, Johnny Cash, David Bowie. Um, there are some songs that I used to busk that were maybe a bit more obscure. Um, things like, Country Feedback with REM, or used to
Hmm.
play a lot of Thea Gilmore, an artist that I really, really love, but not many people have heard of. And it was always enjoyable to play those songs, but they didn't bring much in terms of money, and that has to be the priority for those kind of performances. It's finding that balance of what I really enjoy playing, and what people enjoy hearing, and
Yeah,
it's quite a kind of a balance to find that as kind of an art to kind of determining what an audience is going to enjoy. Uh, but the main thing with that is to never ever find myself playing music that I don't like. Because if I'm playing stuff
of
that I
course.
don't enjoy playing, I might as well just go and get the office job that I'm avoiding. Because what is the point
Yeah, yeah.
of
You're not
being
going to
at
enjoy that
yeah
any less than playing
yeah
these songs that you actively loathe.
yeah. I mean,
It's different if it's the function band. It's different because that's a specific. It's kind of like it's kind of like a burlesque troupe almost. You
yeah
know, when you buy the when you book them, you're booking a specific show. There's a specific type of thing you're booking. With a Keeley band, it's much the same. You know, you're not booking a Keeley band to play you Metallica covers.
no no
You're booking a Keeley band to play you Keeley music that you can dance to in a very specific way. So
yeah
you're going into that knowing full well what you're doing, and if you
exactly
happen
yeah
to enjoy playing that type of music, then that's all the better. But when you're busking, and I'll go to ask you a question shortly that'll probably tie into this. But when you're busking, I can imagine that it would be very easy to get carried away with doing stuff you don't enjoy, and would end up I don't know about appealing to the wrong people, but like, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
it's
but if I had a quid for every time someone had said, "Can you play Wonderwall?"
of
or
course, yeah, that's the point I'm trying to make here. Yeah,
in Glasgow, going to give us a sash biggin, like, no, I'm not playing that.
yeah, fuck me.
But the nice thing about busking is, if it's an absolutely terrible day and that is all the kind of response you're
Mm,
getting, there is absolutely nothing to stop you just packing up and going home. With with
mhm.
a with the function bands, or with the kind of, not so much with the function band because that's generally quite an enjoyable gig. I used to do a lot of pub covers gigs,
Yeah,
and if they are going to want the most kind of well known popular crowd
yeah,
pleasers that you've got in your set, and there are plenty. If I go for things like the Beatles, David Bowie, those kind of numbers, there are lots that I can do that will go down a storm and that I'll enjoy playing. But occasionally you will get the crowd that are just an absolutely miserable bunch. I mean, there was a pub at the end of the street here that I used to play, and I had a regular gig in there every other Friday afternoon, and I played there for the best part of a year. And I don't think they clapped once. I don't think I saw a smile once.
yeah.
Occasionally, you get folk coming up at the end of it telling you, "Oh, I
Mm,
really enjoyed that." So, well, why didn't you show it during the set?
yeah.
But the
There's
thing
nothing
with
more
those kind of,
demoralising than looking out and seeing
yeah,
dead blank eyes
and
staring
that
back
happens a
at
lot
you.
with function gigs, with pub covers
Yeah,
gigs. But the thing with those ones is you're booked in. You've got a contract to be there to play for a
yeah,
specific time, and if you don't do that, you don't get paid. And my
yeah.
worst ever gig was a pub on the outskirts of Falkirk in Polmont, and my audience for the first half hour of that gig was two Neds who were openly doing cocaine off the pool table, who were threatening to attack me with a pool cue because I didn't play Oasis. I, I'm not into Oasis. I've never bothered to learn any Oasis, so I don't know any
Yeah.
Oasis. I couldn't wing it even if I wanted to with these
Mm,
guys. The closest thing that I had in the set was a couple of Libertines numbers that kept them occupied for long enough until they decided they were bored with us and left. So then
yeah.
the pub is empty. And the manager comes over and says, "There's nobody here, so I'm not going to pay you." It's like, that's not my problem. I'm booked to come and play for your punters. If you don't have any punters, nothing I can do about
Hmm.
that.
Aye.
And that's the one time that I kind of found myself getting kind of really quite bullshit at a gig and saying, getting out my musician's union card and saying, if you don't cough up, I'm going to be on the phone to the lawyers the next morning. And I wound up playing for 2 hours just
Mm.
to the manager, really passive aggressively, and and just so that they would have to pay me. And it was the
Hmm.
most miserable, awful, soul destroying
Yeah.
night. Uh, and I'm glad to say I've never had any as bad as that since. But it's one of the reasons why I'm really picky nowadays with the pub covers gigs that I take, and why I don't do nearly so many. At that point, I'd just been through quite a nasty breakup, and we had bought a flat together, this flat here, and I was left paying all the bills for that on my own. So I was in a position at that point where I needed the money. I needed to cover
Yeah.
the mortgage. So I was taking every gig that would pay, no matter how bad it was. And from that, I managed to kind of get through that spell where I was kind of first having to take all the bills on my own, um, and kind of overpaid things enough that I could have brought the mortgage down to a level where I could afford it just from things like busking. And that spell really taught me a lot, that I do not want to be playing gigs that I don't enjoy to at least some degree. I never want to find
Yeah.
myself in a situation like that again, where I'm playing to people that openly hate what I'm doing, because that is it was just the most miserable time. And I was really, really close to giving up music and going and just, you know, finding some office job that I could get by in without it being completely soul crushing. That was kind of about the time that Neil came in with the offer to do Furore, and that was so much more enjoyable doing the Cayley gigs. We had a lot of quite regular ones. Like we used to do a hotel out in Dunfermline every Hogmanay. We were booked for 2 nights for those ones. The night before Hogmanay and Hogmanay itself, and the night before could be a bit slow because they kind of did. Excuse me, my voice is still a wee bit going here, but
take your time, man.
Sorry. Yeah, where was it?
Take it away.
Yeah.
Take it away.
Yeah, I was just going to get some water. I honestly didn't think I'd manage to talk for 45 minutes this week.
Yeah. So, like, you just to touch on while that water goes down, just to touch on those 2 night things. First night of that, though, gives you a chance to have like a sort of live rehearsal before the big show, because I'm assuming that those kind of Hogmanay nights in the hotel would have been some of the busiest and most raucous nights you would have been part of.
The night before, because they split it up into kind of 2 different crowds, the 2 different kind of venues in the room, in the hotel, and you'd go to one on one night and the other on the other night. And I think the first night that we were playing mostly to kind of folk that had come up from England for their Taste of Scotland Hogmanay night. And no harm to them. They were nice folk, and they were kind of enjoying hearing the music, but they didn't come from that culture where they've had, social dancing in school and learning all the dances. And it was really hard going, even though we told them we'll talk you through the steps. It's no bother, you'll pick it up fine. It was like pulling teeth trying to get folk onto the dance floor for those nights. Second night, Hogmanay itself, it was more a crowd of local folk, and they knew every dance. They were asking us for like obscure dances that we barely knew. They knew everything, and they danced the whole night. And those nights are just magic. I love doing the Cayley gigs when it's like that.
Yeah, because you feed on that. Like whether it's a Cayley show or a rock show or any other kind of live performance, if you sense that the room is getting into it, if you sense the room has started moving, you feed off that.
Yeah.
The energy makes you better. It makes you last longer. It makes you enjoy it more, and then it means that it can change the momentum of an entire entire year for your band. If like one show is like that, you just start to feel so much more positive about the direction you're going in, and that it's not such a waste of time.
The relationship between the band and the crowd, when they have a good time, we have a good time, and then the more kind of we feed off that energy, the more they get into it. And that was like the last gig that we did with Marshall Chips. This was last year. This was an incredibly last minute thing. We got the opportunity to play a gig with Art Brut. They are one of my favorite bands. We've played with them once before. We did a gig a few years ago before lockdown, when it was ourselves, Slime City, and Art Brut at Stereo, and that was a really good night. But I was terrified that night because it was like the biggest gig that I had ever done at that point. This one was a lot more last minute, so I didn't have the chance to kind of really build it up and get really nervous about it. It just kind of happened. It turned out that Art Brut were coming over to play a gig with Biss. Because Biss were doing their was it their 30th anniversary shows last year? I think it was 30th. So it was Biss, Longleg, and the Yummy Furs, who are sort of 3 of Eddie Argus's favourite bands. So he rang Biss up and said, "Can we jump on this bill? We would love to play it." And they're big fans of Art Brut. So yeah, no problem. Come on over. Art Brut are based in Germany now, so it was going to cost them a fortune to come over and bring all their equipment just for that one show. So they were borrowing gear to do that one, and they decided to add a couple of extra shows on really last minute just to kind of make it worth their while coming over. And about a week before the Edinburgh gig, Mandarin put a Facebook post up saying that they've not found a support band for Art Brut for this gig in Edinburgh yet. Is there anybody that could do it? By the way, you would need to provide the entire back line because their back line's in Germany. They've not been able to bring it over for these shows.
Okay.
But I saw that and it's like, me and the guys are free on that night. We've got a back line and a van. We love Art Brut. So messaged Eddie, said, yeah, we could do that. And they jumped at the chance because they'd enjoyed the show that we did with them before lockdown.
Mm-hmm.
And it was an absolutely brilliant night. And as I say, there wasn't time to get nervous about it. I just kind of so busy organising everything to make sure that all the backline that we needed was there. I didn't have time to think about the actual performance. But then I kind of got up on the stage and looked out and it's like, oh wow, this is really busy. Because I think the venue capacity was about 300 and it was mostly full. I found that Art Brut are very good at Art Brut audiences are very good at coming out to support the support bands, which you don't always get on kind of big rock shows. And they were really, really lovely and really supportive and got really into what we were doing, and it was such an absolute blast playing that show, and then getting to see one of my favourite bands afterwards. And so nights like that is why we do it,
It is, yeah. I can't claim to have had a night quite like that in my time playing
I've not had
music.
many.
We have, we've been consigned to far more kind of more local and smaller shows. But even at that, just catching the right audience on the right night, it's just something special about it. Our first show with the new lineup that we've got now was in like Newark Hill in Motherwell, and it was a small music festival called Broken Speaker in November, and that was such a great experience. The crowd gave us a really lovely reaction, and with it being the first show with the new lineup, and with it being my first show in 5 years, I was quite nervy about it. I don't think I would have admitted it at the time.
When you've not done it in a long time,
yeah, I was quite nervous about that one, and but I felt so great afterwards. So I feel like we got off the kind of beaten track a wee bit and have landed here. I think what I would like to ask you about next is art pop, because that's something altogether
pop art
different. Pop art, sorry, yes, pop art. Yeah, I'm mixing that up there. I'm trying to create we peek behind the curtain, folks. I'm trying to create the banner for Marshall Chip's Bandcamp information, and I'm distracted by it.
No worries.
Pop art, yes. So, to my understanding, and I haven't really heard anything, but I have done a wee bit of reading. This is a comedy duo.
Yeah, it's been a few different things over the years. It started out with my mate Ben Hughes. I've known him since university. Really good friend of mine. Really odd guy. Lovely, brilliantly weird guy. And you can't have enough folk like that in your life. And he had started doing quite straight ahead stand up, but he decided he wanted to do the odd kind of musical number in it, and he is not musical at all. So he gave me a shout saying, "Could you give me some advice on writing songs?" And we kind of started jamming together. So he would write the lyrics for these daft songs, and I would try and come up with music. And we started kind of performing them, and people could have. Sorry, I'm getting my voice is going again.
No worries, take your time.
So we started performing these really weird songs, and audiences would either absolutely love it or absolutely hate it. We never got a kind of an in-between indifferent audience.
Mhm.
There was always one way or the other. There was a reaction, and
Like that
when you
Norm Macdonald, like the Norm Macdonald style of comedy, like sometimes he would revel in bombing because
yeah,
he would just try to bomb even harder if people were not responding to what he was doing.
and there was one time we were playing this really really old man pub somewhere in Glasgow. I can't remember which pub it was, but it was if you can imagine the straightest, whitest, kind of fattest Rangers crowd you can imagine, and then you've got this very eccentric guy gets up, and Ben decides he's going to open with a song that he'd come up with called "You'll Do," which is a song about grinder hookups. And he finds the oldest, straightest guy in the bar, and he directs it entirely to him.
Are we talking the sovereign rig wearing big Union flag
Yep,
tattoos type guy?
yep.
I'm
Then followed it up
sure
with
that
a.
went down. I'm sure that went down a storm.
But then followed it up with an Electric Six cover of "Gay Bar," and were escorted off the premises.
Electric Six. I don't know if you know this, David, but Electric Six is one of my favourite bands.
Yeah, yeah, I do know that.
Love it. Dick Valentine would love to hear that.
We did find places that did like us as well. We did a lot of gigs over in Edinburgh at the Freak Easy Cabaret. We did a few shows with Paul Puppets and Scunner over here, and we played quite a lot at the Nice and Sleazy's open mic, and they were always really nice to us. So yeah, there's a few things that you can find on Bandcamp. I think it's just popart.bandcamp.com. I think I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, but I think that's the address. And there's lots of weird stuff out there. I mean, the fact that we put out albums called things like "We Are Pop Art," and for that we can only apologise. And if you have been affected by any of the issues raised by Pop Art, helplines are available. That gives you some idea of the level that we're on here. So for most of the time, yeah. Sorry.
Sounds like my kind of thing. straight up my alley. I have found Bandcamp, and I'm just going to quickly fire it up here so that anyone who's watching the video can go purchase that music right now. It's right here on the ticker.
Cool. Nice. For most of the time, it was just me and Ben, but we did eventually expand it out into a full 4-piece rock band, and that was some of the most fun stuff that we ever did.
Mm-hmm.
So we did it with Jimmy McKee, Jenny Tingle, and Peter Wernick from Marshall Chipped. We're all involved in the 4-piece lineup at one point or another. So to take these songs, because when we recorded them, we tended to record with electric guitars and electronic drums. So there was always a kind of an intention that this would be a kind of like an actual band, even if we didn't have the people available at the time. But the last few gigs that we did, we were able to do it as a full-on rock band and do these really weird. And there was one of the last gigs that we did before Ben moved away. We got invited on to play this all-day festival, and there were some fairly big names on it. Like BMX Bandits were playing, Just Jones were on it, and Colin's Godson. I think they were organising it, and we were on first. So this is quite early on in the day. This is when you would expect the kind of the family friendly crowd, and Ben decides that he's going to put in a cover, a Pansy Division cover, and if you know their material, you will be aware of just how inappropriate that was for the time slot we were on.
Yeah,
but that tells you everything you need to know about Ben.
That sounds like the kind of thing that Davey from Twisted Rainbow used to do. He played some outdoor festivals during the day, and he would come out with some interesting material. very much in the same vein.
I mean, most of our stuff was quite innocent. We had we had loads of songs about Christmas. We had lots of songs about Doctor Who, and one of our biggest numbers was on Harry Potter before JK turned that all into a bit of a kind of more of an issue.
Yes, yeah. She did that. That's for sure. So you mentioned that Ben's moved away. Have you guys kept in touch about potentially making more music together, whether it be even remotely, or is that something that
Not
is
just
just
kept in
not?
touch. We actually have done.
So you've continued making
We
some
have,
music
yeah.
together remotely.
We didn't expect to, but I got an email from Ben. Um, was was this in lockdown or was this before lockdown? Anything that's kind of vaguely around that time period, I have barely any
Yes.
conception of when the dates were. It's
Anything that
all blurred
happened
into
in,
one.
yeah, 100%. Anything that happened in 2019 or before happened over a decade ago. It
Yeah,
feels like
that's the before
it's
times.
yes, it is
There's the
insane
before
how
times, the dark times, and now.
yes, the last 5 years have been the longest 5 years in history.
Yeah.
Something has happened to time itself. It's just not. It isn't normal. Like January
No.
there was absolutely insane.
Oh, January was an eternity.
Even
I'm,
by
I'm,
January standards, it went on forever.
I'm surprised it's not still January.
Wait, don't be too sure, man. Are we about to like wake up and it's going to be January still, and we're in some sort of mad like we're hooked up to some machine, like a dream machine? I'll always be January, you fuckers.
I'm
Um,
very little would surprise me now. And
at this stage, yeah,
Musk is probably working on it as we speak.
he's always up to something. That
Yeah.
bastard.
Wow. I say that. I don't think he's ever actually invented anything in his life. He just buys things, doesn't he?
That's true. I saw a post by someone who used to work with him and knew him quite well, and said he has never invented anything, with the
No.
exception of his own image.
Aye.
Like he's invented his image expertly, but other than that, he's talented at absolutely nothing beyond manipulating people, and that rings true. Like the guy's a complete fucking moron, and I don't know how he's managed to weasel his way into. Well, it's not really managed to weasel his way. He's illegally invaded like
Yeah.
the U.S. Treasury. Like
If you're a
this
horrible
is
person
the
who's
America
born
that
into money, then you can do whatever you like, can't you?
yeah, it's true. It is true, unfortunately.
And that's what the last pop art album and the last Marshall Chipped album were all about.
Let's talk about that last Marshall Chipped album. I happen to have a copy of it right here. It's not signed by the band, I would just like to point out, which is an outrage considering I bought it at the
At the
launch
launch
gig.
gig, yeah.
That was at the now sadly departed 13th Note, well, for the time being at least. Who knows where that'll go down the line.
Yeah, I would
Great
love to
show.
see that back. It was
Yeah.
absolute
It
crying
was
shame that was allowed to go.
yeah. The way it went as well, just the treatment of the people that worked there was
Totally,
diabolical. But nevertheless, that was a great night. You guys played super well. You played this new record in its entirety. I say new. It's been a couple of years now.
It was new then.
No doubt you're working on the next one. You've actually had a couple of releases since this one. If I'm not mistaken, you've released a live recording of that show
Yeah.
through Bandcamp, and you've released a single. I want to say
Yeah,
it's called The Architect.
The Architect. Yep. That's
Yeah. Is that part of the next project, or was that something you just released as a standalone at the time?
it's kind of too early to say. I mean, we've got sketches of new things. There's probably about an album's worth of new music that we're sitting on. We're just trying to come up with lyrics at the moment, and that is always the bit that takes by far the longest for me.
As a guy who's had writer's block since about 2015, I can attest to that.
You know what it's like, yeah.
Yeah.
So there is new stuff in the ether, but it's probably a fair ways away at the moment.
Yeah.
But
In the meantime,
we've got Dog Whistleblower, which it's kind of an odd one because it's kind of in my mind at least, it's kind of almost like a double album with the one that came before it. Which was May We Live in Interesting Times. Just because the recording of both of them kind of came so close to each other. And I think a lot of people think Interesting Times was our lockdown album because it came out at the end of that. We actually had all that album written and recorded before COVID was a thing. We were about a week's worth away of studio time to get the final mixing and mastering done, and it would have been out before lockdown happened. But that could have delayed everything. So a lot of people think that that's a lockdown album, but it really isn't. Whereas Dog Whistleblower, that very much is a lockdown album. That was written as it
Yeah.
all was going on, and
It's a lockdown album, both in how it was made, but also, as I'm sure you're about to point out, thematically.
yeah,
It's kind of like it has a theme that runs through it. There's a through line across the album. Tell us about the theme of Dog Whistleblower and where you came up with that, because I've always found that a really fascinating an album for that reason. It's not something that I've heard a lot of in the local scene. So I thought that was just mind blowing when you explained that to me previously. If you
it's
could go ahead and explain to the listeners where it came from, the inspiration behind it, and how it all came
yeah,
together.
it's kind of sort of a mix of sort of Yes Minister, the thick of it kind of thing. It's the whole thing is a sort of satirical concept album set within a dystopian failing government, if you can imagine such a thing. Um, the the character that is the kind of the protagonist of all the songs at the start of it, he is coming in from the back benches, promoted beyond his ability, and finds himself in the cabinet. And at the start of the album, I don't think he is an absolutely terrible person. He's a Tory, so he's not a great person, but there is still hope for him at the start of it. There is still the possibility that he might have got into politics with good intentions, even if they're misguided intentions, being a Tory. As he gets further up into the into the kind of the inner circle of it as the album goes on, and he gets more kind of drawn in amongst the kind of the Italians that are really pulling the strings, he becomes more and more corrupted by the whole thing as he goes further in. There's a kind of a point in the album about midway through where he's kind of starting to realize just how awful everything is. And there's a kind of a point where he kind of has the sort of long dark night of the soul. Do you go all in and just try and work the system to your advantage and screw everybody else? Or do you try and save the remnant of soul that you still have? And if you've paid even the slightest bit of attention to the news at that time, you will realize he went all in. And by the end of the album, he is trying to stage his own coup to overthrow the government and take leadership for himself. And thankfully, in our fictional world where this album is happening, by the end of it, it all falls apart and his party is out in the rear and he is left to pick up the pieces of kind of the nothing that he is left with, and it completely fails for him. I would like to think in the real world, with a change of government, that we're onto a better course now, but I'm still going to take a fair bit of convincing. And it
I think the first 6 months of this new government has not inspired confidence.
literally
The
the only thing I
continue,
can say is, well, they're not the Tories.
yeah, but are
I want to
they
say
any
better than
better?
that.
But they're not really. They're indistinguishable. Like Rachel Reeves in particular, I feel is indistinguishable from our last several Tory predecessors. Like the financial decisions and the fiscal
It still
decisions that
feels
this
very
Labour
much on the
government are
same
using.
road. Yeah, I
It's
don't feel as if
austerity
much has
by
changed.
yeah, it's just austerity by another name. We're having to make difficult decisions. They weren't difficult decisions to the Tories. They don't care. They actively and outwardly don't care. Labour don't really care either, but they pretend that it's difficult for them.
Yeah,
That's really the only distinction I've been able to draw between the two so far. The way that left wing Labour Party MPs have been treated, and it's only today that some of them have started to get the whip back, but not even all. Despite being democratically elected members of parliament, like that's what their constituents have voted for.
yeah.
Um, it's just I'm not convinced at all. And I would love to say that, oh, but if we would go independent, it would be so much better. It would, I think, objectively be slightly better because we would have full say, but
We'd
it
have
wouldn't be all
that
that
little
much
bit more
better
control,
because,
but we're still having to pick
yeah,
between whatever
yeah,
politicians put themselves up for
yeah,
election.
because the current Scottish government is not doing a whole lot of great stuff, you know, and there's only so far you can get by saying, oh, we're mitigating stuff that Westminster are doing and we're hamstrung. You do have some power and you've got a budget to use to exercise the power, and they don't.
I,
They spend most of their time making excuses.
yeah, now there are so many things that they could be doing better, and there are so many things where they just feel like if they would just have the courage to actually just ignore the fact that the press are going to lynch them for it, because
Yeah,
the press are almost all controlled by Tory interests anyway. They're going to be out for them knives out no matter what they do. So they might as
yeah,
well actually just have the courage to take the decisions to put taxes up on the people that can afford it and spend the money wisely on 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 things that absolutely really need them. I mean, there's so many things. I mean, we'd be here all day if we were
yeah,
listing the things that need investments.
yeah.
I know, everybody listening knows it.
Just the NHS alone,
Yeah,
that one institution, which is the linchpin of British society, is the flagship policy that made Great Britain what it was following the Second World War. And it's fallen to pieces because of stealth privatisation that
have
has
you?
been harboured by both the Tories and Labour.
Yeah, have you noticed a big increase recently in the number of adverts you're seeing for private healthcare companies?
Yes, yes, I have. Don't particularly appreciate it either.
No,
That can get all the way to fuck.
yeah, and
Yeah, YouTube's
that's
riddled with them. Maybe if you can get a break from a betting advert every 3 seconds on a YouTube video, it will be to see a fucking private healthcare video. It's getting unhealthy, the amount of it.
the
It's
normalization
just
of that.
been,
Yeah,
yes, yeah, and it's quite disgusting, quite frankly. After the way that the NHS has been treated, abused
aye.
for the last 2 decades.
I mean that needs so much protecting and investing because it is it is literally life saving.
It is. Yeah, it's the thing that makes us who we are as a society over here. Because not everyone has an NHS to that degree that's free at the point of use.
Yeah,
The United States doesn't have any healthcare
no,
practically,
and we are
and
being
there are
pushed so far down the road that the United States are on,
yeah,
and I can only see that pressure getting worse now that we've got Trump and Musk controlling the White
yeah,
House. So, and that is something that we're going to very much have to resist over here.
yes. It looks like you're gonna. On the flip side, it looks like you're gonna have plenty of material to finish off that next record, David.
That's the thing. I was talking about this with Mike the other day. It's like, I, how do we approach um, songwriting for the next album? Because I feel like if we just go down that line, I'm just repeating myself, and it just becomes playing to the choir, preaching to the converted. How can we come at this from a new angle that's going to reach out to people that need to hear that?
Yeah. Let me ask you about that actually, because that's a good point you raise. Do you feel with the kind of artistic choices that you've made, playing in Marshall Chipped and writing for Marshall Chipped, do you feel that those choices have hamstrung you a wee bit? Do you feel like you're sort of stuck being this political band, or do you feel that you could quite easily branch out into other topics if you felt
Um,
like going down different avenues and exploring something else? Do you feel like you would be able to do that and make it
I think we
fit
probably,
into the canon?
I think we could. I mean, to go back to where it all started with REM, they have always been a band that have worn their hearts completely on their sleeve with politics.
Very true.
And there have
Yeah,
been albums where they've been very directly writing about their political beliefs, and albums where they've written completely other things. I mean, Out of Time was, you said that was an album with no politics at all. It was all going to be love songs because
yeah,
that was something that he found really difficult to write without being cheesy. So he wanted to set himself a challenge. Could you write an album of 10 love
yeah,
songs and make it good? So there is nothing that should feel off limits for what you want to write about. It's just, can you make it worthwhile? Can you make it interesting? Can you make it not cliche? And that is difficult. That is really, really difficult.
Yeah.
And occasionally, I feel like we kind of hit the nail on the head with some things. And lyrics is by far the hardest thing for me. So there's plenty of times where I kind of look back on things and think, didn't really get that right. Didn't say what I wanted to say with particular songs, or like why are you, why are you saying that you don't need to be. But it's trying to find ways of communicating who we are, what we're about, and putting that across in a way that people will want to hear. And we're working on that for the next album, but I don't know when that'll come out. I don't know when we'll actually have that. And we've got two songs that are finished: The Architect and an untitled ghost story. And neither of them are as directly political as anything that was on Dog Whistleblower. But The Architect comes from Doctor Who, and it's from the episode's Paradise Hotel, which was the first episode I ever saw when I was a kid. This is going back to the Sylvester McCoy era, and it's a strange one. It's if you could imagine J.G. Ballard's High Rise, but told as a pantomime. It's on iPlayer,
Right.
so it's worth going and looking up.
Okay.
It's strange. It's this evil alien architect who designs these perfect buildings for perfect architectural buildings, paradise towers, but can't stand the idea of messy people living their lives and spoiling his perfection. So he designs them as death traps. They are designed to kill their occupants. So it's not quite directly in the lyrics to The Architect, but it's this thing of an evil controlling force. So it kind of comes back into the Dog Whistleblower territory again.
Yeah.
This corporate evil that is taking over everything.
Was there not a real world story of a guy who did that, designed a hotel that had like death traps inside it, and it was almost like the hotel itself almost turned into like a maze when people would go inside?
I
I feel
don't know.
like that either that happened,
Either that's happened, or you've
or
watched Saw and fallen asleep and had a weird dream.
yeah, either that was a true story that I heard on a true crime podcast, or it was an urban legend of some kind that I've heard about on a podcast. But I'm fairly sure that I actually heard something about that. Now I'm going to have to go and look that
You
up.
have to look that up, yeah.
And ruin my Google history even more.
When
so
Musk finally comes for you, he's going to find a hell of a lot on that hard drive.
I've got a baseball bat, mate. It's all right. And I know how to use it. Before we wrap things up, I wanted to touch on something that's non-musical. I wanted to kind of take a left turn completely, because you're notably a massive model railway enthusiast. And I wanted to get you to touch on that for just a wee bit. Is that something that you have always had an interest in, or how did you take an interest in that, and where did it develop from a sort of interest into what it is now, which is quite a passion?
Oh, that comes from childhood. When I was a really wee boy, loved watching the trains on the railway line, because I grew up in Ayr, just a stone's throw away from Falkland Yard, which was so when I was walking to primary school, there was this big freight depot that would do a lot of the marshalling there. So kind of standing there watching the trains go by. And when I was very young, I'd built a model railway in Hornby Double O, and I was kind of really into that when I was a kid. And then kind of music came along and kind of got into more kind of quote unquote cool kind of hobbies. And that kind of the model railway stuff kind of fell away for years. But in lockdown, I found myself kind of getting kind of drawn back into it. I think a really good friend of mine, Mark Bailey, who runs Bailey Guitars down in Ayrshire, had said to me that when your hobby becomes your work, you need to find another hobby. So guitars were his passion,
Hmm.
his hobby, and he founded a company building guitars. But he needed something to switch off from when he finished work for the day. So he got into to building windmills and kind of electricity generators for kind of living off grids. That was his thing, and I got back into the model railways. It started off in lockdown. I was watching a lot of the programs that Tim Dunn had made, things like the architecture, the railways built, and the Secrets of the London Underground, and just kind of got fascinated by the stories of that, and started watching a few YouTube channels on model railways and got back into it. And it's just been a really nice thing to have this thing that's just completely separate from everything that I'm doing musically, where I can just come home and switch off and just set the railway up and watch them kind of go around for a wee while on the track. It's just kind of sort of hypnotic just watching them go round and round. So if I've had a bad day busking, I can just come home and just switch off for a while. And it's
De-stressor,
yeah,
yeah.
it's a bit more productive than doom scrolling on Facebook or something like that.
I would say very much so, yeah. Do you have like a model building project that you're especially proud of over the years that you would be like, that's my kind of favourite set that I've ever spent any time with?
Well, it is all kind of relatively new to me again because it's only about 2 years that I've been back into it.
I see,
So
right.
the layout that I've got now has just been built up in the last 2 years. But there's lots of little details where the musical stuff kind of bleeds into it. So
Yeah.
if you go onto the YouTube channel that I've got for it, you'll notice that the town has got a little model nice and sleazy's. There's
Wonderful.
there's there's a half man half biscuit reference because there's a billboard for Monsters of Rock that has been spray
Right.
painted in Church Hall if wet, and you'll notice there's little billboard posters for Marshall Chips,
Yeah.
for Visceral Noise Department, which is the other band that Pete and Mike play in.
Shared the stage with
For
those guys back
yeah,
in November. Yeah.
for those those posters for Alice and Neil's album. We were dating at the time that I started building the layout, and we stayed good friends. So there's little references to her albums on there. So there's all sorts of things that where the music and the model making kind of intersect.
That is wonderful. What goes into to building it? Do you hand paint the models, or what sort of how deep are we going here?
Most of the ones that I've done so far are kits. So you kind of you buy
Mhm.
in the kits and build it up, and everything's all printed out for you there. But then you kind of modify them all and can put little personal touches in, and that's just
I see.
printing out little design something on the computer and print it out and paste it on. Uh, so this is all kind of all the technology that I'm using that now that is second nature to anyone with a computer. None of that existed when I was
Yeah.
7 with my first train sets. So it's been really fun to kind of to find ways that I can put lots of little personal details into it now.
And are you working on a project with that just now?
The next stage, I don't know when I'll have the time to do this. I want to build a little elevated section so that because it's all flat at the moment. So I want to build a branch line that goes up, kind of rises up and has a bridge over one of the other tracks and goes off into a sort of set of sidings on a shelf layout. But that I don't know when I'll have the time to actually do that.
Yeah, you're a busy man, as we've covered. You have a lot of different things going on at any given time
Yeah.
just with music. I think we can probably end the evening there because we have spoken for almost an hour and a half, and I'm quite conscious of the fact that you have still got a messed up throat, so I won't keep you much longer.
Well,
But
I'm
needless to
surprised that my
say,
voice held out this long.
yeah, you
So
have done
as I
super
say,
well.
like 2 days ago, it was like swallowing was like swallowing broken glass. I could not make a sound at all. So I'm glad that I managed to get
Yeah,
through this.
same. Yeah, I'm glad too because it's been a pleasure to speak to you, David.
You too.
Do you guys have any upcoming shows?
There's a couple of things coming up with Furore, but they are sort of, they're private function gigs. There probably will be something with Marshall Chips because we usually kind of arrange to do something, even if it's just a wee, just kind of find someone that will put us on. But there's nothing definitely booked at the moment yet. But we'll probably film some stuff in the studio to put up on YouTube and social media because we do that quite often.
Yeah, yeah.
But there's nothing very much kind of definitely happening that I can plug at the moment.
No worries at all. Thanks so very much for speaking to me. It's been an absolute pleasure, David. You guys are at marshallchipped.bandcamp.com. That's where people can go to purchase your music. Your social media, is it just at Marshall Chipped across social media? Yeah.
Yeah, for as much as we're using social media at the moment, I'm kind of
Yeah.
trying to take a wee bit of a break from it. It's
Yeah. I know
hard to
you've.
actually pull yourself away from it.
It is, yeah, not even from a personal standpoint, but if you have a page, and I've noticed this most of all with NHC music, I can't get rid of mine if I want to
Yeah,
keep the page. So I would have to basically create a separate account just to be able to use the page anyway. So it's just sort of redundant leaving. But I have made the jump to Blue Sky now with NHC music,
yeah. You'll
and
find us
personally
at
in my
Marshall
band as
Chipped
well.
on Blue Sky as well.
Yeah. So yeah, everybody go give Marshall Chip a follow. Obviously, support David with everything he's doing. If you see him out and about busking, say hi to him and pop a couple quid in. Do not ask him for Oasis because he'll probably chip
No,
you.
no.
I wanted to close actually on that note with one question. One question in three parts.
Okay.
What is the best, the worst, and the most ridiculous interaction you've ever had while busking?
The best was actually the last busk that I did before this bug came on and I completely lost my voice.
Wow.
I had a really weirdly good day. It was a Wednesday midweek, kind of January. I'm not expecting anything much, and I don't know what happened, but I must have been doing something right that day because like folk were putting tenors in. That that just never happens.
No, you wouldn't expect that. No.
No. So that was an unexpectedly lovely day, and I'd been fiddling about with my amp the day before trying to fix a bit of a technical problem, and I must have done something right to it to get it sounding really good because everybody that went by that day just seemed to be absolutely loving what I was doing, loving what they were hearing.
Hmm.
So that's been one of the best. Um, best, worst, and most ridiculous.
Yes.
The worst ones, I I try and block them out. Like I'll post something on Facebook if something awful happens, and then just try and kind of forget about it and move on because I don't really want to dwell on the bad days too much. But you'll always get something. It's Glasgow. There's always some weirdo. But the same day
Yeah.
that everyone was putting the fivers and tenors in, I had a guy that came up and walked straight into me, and like normally, like if somebody is maybe like on their phone and not paying much attention,
Yeah.
that can happen. But they'll say,
Uh
"Oh, sorry,
huh.
mate, didn't see you," and walk round you.
Yeah.
And this guy just kept trying to walk through me like I wasn't there. Like three times he went straight into me. I had to shove him off me. It's like, what are you doing, man?
Did he look like he might be like adult on something, or what
Oh
was the situation?
yes,
Right. Okay. So he was doing the walk
yeah.
and just yeah.
You know, that kind of thing where like you're also kind of in the back of your mind you're thinking, can I keep enough of an eye on this guy that I can make sure that he's not trying to dip the case.
Of course. Yeah. That's possible that's what he's going for if he's doing shit like that, isn't
Yeah,
it? We live in a strange and wonderful place we call Glasgow. It is. the best of humanity and also
And that's
the most
absolutely
flummoxing
it.
of humanity.
When you're busking, you will see the absolute best of people and the absolute worst. You do also get some ridiculous ones, and some really lovely stuff that's come from busking. Like I remember once a bunch of students were going by. They were kind of in the middle of doing a flitting, and they're walking down Sauchiehall Hall Street carrying a sofa. They saw me playing, and they sat the sofa down and sat in the middle of Sauchiehall Hall Street and just sat and listened for about half an hour.
That is wonderful.
I love when
That's
stuff
a
like that
brilliant,
happens.
yeah. What a brilliant moment! I can imagine walking past that. You wouldn't even find that too out of place in Glasgow and Solihull Street.
Just another day in Sauchiehall Hall Street. Yeah,
It is. Aye. I think that's a nice place to leave it, man.
yeah,
Thanks again for joining me, and we should catch up soon. Definitely reach out to NHC when you guys have got a show going, and if I can make it along, I'll try and get to it.
We'll let you know. Yeah,
and all the best until I see you next.
You too.
Thanks so much.
Cheers.
Guys, if you want to follow us on social media, you can get us at NHC Music Glasgow on Facebook and Blue Sky. And if you go to nhcmusicglasgow.com, you can go to the website, which has got the blog. The most recent posts were an EP feature on Anna Secret Poets 2024 record Cloven Grooves, and also my live review of going to see Soul Asylum with Reservoir Droogs last week. So those are on the blog just now. I'm trying to batter out a few bits and pieces again this week, but I've got a million things on. So yeah, you're just going to have to wait. If you want to get your band added to the A to Z list, the NHC A to Z is back. Just fire us a submission via the portal there on the website. Ditto the gig list, the gig guide is back as well. So send your details through that. Or reach out to us at the page. It's at NHC Music Glasgow on Facebook. And we can certainly get you added to that. In the meantime, I will be back next time. I will be confirming the next guest for the next NHC Present show very soon. So keep an eye on our social media and the website. Before I do, though, I'm going to once again say thank you and good night to David Burns of Marshall Chips. All the best.
Pleasure. Thank you very much.
And congratulations on that triumph of an album as well. I really loved it.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thanks, man.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for having me. Bye.